see if we can retrace how the epidemic, where it kind of got started and where it might have initially moved and where it's moving now. One weekend, I sat down with my laptop and looked through Google Earth imagery, and there's one day, January 23rd, 2013, where the satellite imagery is really pretty clear, and you could pick out individual brown trees. They have to be pretty good-sized trees, but individual brown trees showed up. And so I just put little pins every place I found a tree that could have been a rod tree. And these trees, I think, would be primarily Ceratocystis leuco ʻŌhiʻa infected trees. And so this is where the mortality was. So there's three important areas. One, lower Puna, where the disease really blew up. Maybe it didn't start there, but that's where it kind of blew up. And then that south Hilo area is what's downwind from the landfill where they chip up wood, ʻŌhiʻa infected wood too. And then the other critical area is this lower Wailuku area. This is actually in the old cane fields west of Hilo. And there was a lot more ʻŌhiʻa in there than I think some people realize. There were a lot of big ʻŌhiʻa trees, and they were dying in 2012 and 13 there. There was kind of a lot of mortality north and south of Leilani Estates, and then across the street on the west side too. There was kind of a pocket. There's a few diseased trees there, and then a year later, there's quite a few. There's a lot of diseased trees that kind of look like they're dying all at once. Another year, after 2 years, it's pretty complete, you know. And then after that, you can see from down below this place, it's kind of up on a top of an escarpment. If you look back at it, you see those trees that died in 2011, 2012. And they're still there. They're big, giant trees, but notice there's healthy ʻŌhiʻa that are flowering right below it, you know. And so the disease skipped right over. If you go up to this Hilo area around the old cane fields, particularly in the upper reaches of the old cane fields, they left some of the natural trees up in there, and then down in the ravines, there's ʻŌhiʻa, pretty big ʻŌhiʻa trees there, and they were dying already in 2013 is kind of when they started. This one's right along the north shore of the Wailuku River. And so this is January 2010. The mortality really hasn't started yet. And there you see the brown trees, 2012. And by 2014, by December 2014, so it's pretty complete. And there's another patch in the same area. So June 2012, not much mortality there. And then by January, it started, about the same time as the other site. And then by October 2014, nearly complete. By December 2014, it is. And of course, this is the year of Hurricane Iselle, right? August 2014. And things kind of blew up after that. But this was kind of the epidemic as it was starting. So Hurricane Iselle, when it hit lower Puna there, it was a direct hit in that site. And there was a lot of mortality that showed up, mostly in 2016. So when I first started working on this, there was a lot of mortality. Things have kind of settled down since then, but of course it's still going strong. So this is Waikaleo Puna, 2008, before the epidemic started. This is just a slide I found on the internet that Paul B. Gardner took. And then this is what it looked like 8 years later. So this is a pretty dramatic transition of this forest type. And I think this mortality is Hurricane Iselle related, 18 months after Hurricane Iselle. The Kauai stream up on the Hamakua coast, this might have also been post-Iselle. By January 2017, there were still some trees dying. This would be almost 2.5 years later after Iselle, but most of the mortality had already taken place. And I showed a picture earlier how the mortality has really died down. You don't see much current mortality at Kauai stream. This is the upper Wailuku Riverside along Cattle Hunt Road, where it's wind exposure from a west wind an unusual west wind, some sort of Kona wind seemed to be associated with the disease. And then Waipuna Lake, another site where there was no mortality in 2014. Then they started excavating around here. They were kind of expanding the pasture land, and then the disease showed up after that. There's been massive felling of trees up there to try to contain the disease. But in the lower stretches, Mackay of that felling site, there's still some really fresh mortality. So the disease is kind of picking up here again. And Ryan Proy has some data to show that it is kind of upticking just recently. I'm not really sure what's going on here, but this isn't the main episode. This is some sort of secondary spread. And then this Hona now over on near Captain Cook was a dramatic amount of mortality that took place in April 2016 is when this was photographed. I think, Jimmy, you saw this fairly early on too. And it was mostly on the upper slopes exposed to west wind where the mortality took place. It has, we just flew over it last week, and it has moved a little bit uphill, Mauka of this site, but mostly it's going north and south from there. So this is another area where there was one big episode, but now there seems to be, it's spreading out. Okay. This is a place very remote near the Pahoehoe stream. I think it's near the Hakalau Wildlife Refuge somewhere up there. And so the first humans to land in this spot were helicoptered in. Wouldn't you say, Bill? Perhaps. Yeah. But another wind-associated episode, it really couldn't be human activity or even feral animal activity that could have done this simultaneous inoculation. It's wind is the only way the fungus could possibly have gotten up there. And then the Kohala outbreak, which is pretty extensive in the northern tip of the island, is very problematic. And it's a good place maybe to jump off to other islands, right? And then this is a more recent one up in Hamakua Coast at Kalapa State Park, and there's a couple other properties around there. So there's a number of these episodes where a lot of trees get infected at once. So, and then we had the Kauai episode where there were 2 trees that were found with ʻŌhiʻa last year, and there's since been in those trees and the others that we saw by helicopter, it looked like they were exposed to east or northeast winds, and they were wind-exposed trees. There was a survey that was done in January, and those samples were brought down to PBARC, to Lisa's lab, and there were 7 isolates from 7 other trees of ʻŌhiʻa that we looked at. And the ones that were diagnosed as ʻŌhiʻa and the ones that we have isolates for are all from one pretty small spot. So this is the red would be ʻŌhiʻa. The yellow or the gold are the ʻŌhiʻa. ʻŌhiʻa is well established on the eastern part of the island. It goes even south of here below where the map is. And that ʻŌhiʻa, as Lisa said earlier, is a little bit different than the one here on the Big Island. Okay? It's the same species, but it's genetically a little different. It didn't look like it moved from the Big Island to Kauai. On the other hand, the ʻŌhiʻa is very, very likely to have come from the Big Island by genetic analysis. And this, too, I think, is a wind event. So by genetic analysis, I mean, we took 15 isolates of ʻŌhiʻa from around the Big Island. And we totally sequenced their genome. That's 32 million base pairs of data from 15 isolates. And we compared all those with each other to find areas where there were differences. We'd used other genetic markers, and it couldn't distinguish any of the ʻŌhiʻa from the others. So we had to really go for the most variable ones we could find. So we identified every site where there was variation among those 15 isolates, selected those sites that had what we call microsatellites or simple sequence repeats. These are areas that mutate frequently. And then we designed these primers. We can amplify this region with PCR, look at the length of those products. So we have 20 of those different regions or loci around the genome, and we could tell differences among those by differences in the number of repeats that there are. So they differ by 3 base pair length up or down from there, or maybe more. And then we take those markers and apply them to 158 isolates from around the Big Island and Kauai. And we look at all the alleles found at each of those 20 loci. And then we try to infer the origin and development or accumulation of mutations. So these are all mutations that are happening spontaneously, and they accumulate. As long as there's not sexual reproduction, which doesn't seem to be prominent here, they're not crossing with each other, they're just clones that are moving around the island, accumulating different mutations. Okay? So in this analysis here, the circles represent different population or different number of isolates that have that genotype. So if you look here, right there, so there's 18 isolates that have this combination of mutations, all the same. And the analysis says this is the original Ceratocystis leuco-ʻŌhiʻa in Hawaii. It's this big one here. And then all these other circles connected by lines are all derived from this genotype, that particular type. So each circle is a different genotype. There's 55 different genotypes that we have among 158 isolates that we've characterized. Okay? So wherever you see a line going from this original one, that's a mutation. And then there's another mutation, and then another one, and another one. You see where I'm going? We're looking at accumulations of mutations, different. Okay. So this is the original genotype, and it's found in all these populations. These are just geographic regions, not really populations, but geographic regions. It's found everywhere but on Kauai and the north of Hilo stuff. So this is where the fungus has arrived most recently. All the other places where it's been for some years, they're still carrying a little bit of that original genotype with it. Okay? On the Kona side, there's one major genotype. It's the original one. This is the one that's in Honau now. It's moved up to Holoaloa, and it's moved further to Kolokamauka, further north, and it's also gone south. We're not sure how far yet. Okay? So the Kona isolates are in bright blue. They're all pretty close to the original genotype, probably because the fungus hasn't been there that long. The original genotype got over there, and it hasn't accumulated a lot of mutations yet. It hasn't gone through a lot of generations to accumulate mutations. Okay. The Kauai one also is quite close to the original. Okay? So it hasn't changed much from the original, so it almost certainly came from this same population on the Hawaii Islands. Unfortunately, we don't have this one mutation that it has is unique to the Kauai isolates, the 9 isolates from Kauai. So we don't have an exact match here on the main island. But you know, there's only 158 isolates, and there's hundreds of thousands, I don't know, maybe millions of infected trees. You know, we're dealing with a very small subsample. This is at up off Saddle Road, Cattle Hunt Road, and that genotype has a unique allele there, and we just recently found it in this middle Wailuku area downstream from there, and also it's moved up slightly north on the Waipahoehoe management unit of the Mauna Kea group. Okay, and then there's this purple lineage down here. This is genotypes that were well established in Puna, so the Puna isolates are in red. The Kauai isolates are in gold. This is one population, really. There's no distinction genetically from what's in Puna and what's in Kauai. So this is essentially a Puna genotype, and it was the only thing that was found at Waipunalei, the Kamaʻe site, and the Kauai ranch. So This is a unique Puna type. And then this one seems to be derived from around Hilo. And it's the one, it's in the lower Wailuku, Stainback Road, that remote Pahoehoe site, the Kohala outbreak, which is really kind of distantly related, where you see a faint line connecting those. That means it's not a real strong, statistically strong connection. And then from the lower Wailuku site, there's this new Kolopa Waimea outbreak. So this is the one that's really moving north and might be the one that's most problematic. So here's a map showing the sites of the original genotype. That's in red now, okay? So it's pretty widespread everywhere except for the north of Hilo population. And then this was that early mutation for the Puna genotype, so it's well established in Puna. It's also in Kauai. And then there's one isolate that had this early mutation here on the Wailuku River. And then this green one I think is the one that's started around Hilo and moved up north to the Hamakua coast. So these green triangles are here. So we got all three of these early genotypes from the Wailuku River down to lower Puna, and then of course also in Kauai, because the Kauai population seems to be derived directly from Puna. And the winds go that way, right? So the winds take inoculum from Puna out to sea, and then it cuts back across Kauai. So these pinks are all just one or two unique mutations from that original genotype. And these pink circles are all different from each other. Almost every pink circle is genetically different from the other pink circles, okay? But these are lineages that haven't gone too far, right? They haven't led to massive outbreaks. We haven't picked them up in the major episodes yet. There is an exception. One of those that could be pink is here in magenta as a pentagon, and this is that upper Wailuku genotype that shows up just along the Wailuku River drainage. It has a particular mutation that's unique to that area. Okay. So these light purple isolates are all derived from that early Puna genotype, the dark purple squares. So the light purple ones are derived from that. And there's two lineages that go, I'm not showing a distinction there. So this appeared to be an early population from lower Puna that's jumped up Kama'e'e, Waipunalei, and this Kauai Ranch site showed up. Otherwise, it stayed mostly in lower Puna. And then these light green triangles are related to strains from Hilo. And then this Kohala population is related to these light green ones, but it's pretty distinct, but it seems to be part of this same general trend from Hilo moving up. So I circled in this case, wherever we got a bunch of isolates, two or more isolates that were genetically identical and associated with what appeared to be an episode, an outbreak, all at once. And in each of those circled areas, all the isolates are genetically identical to each other, or there's a minor mutation difference. So the inoculum must have come from one tree or one group of trees and infected those trees all at once. It isn't inoculum coming from different places at different times. It's all in one genetic, one clone of the fungus that's hitting them all at once. And then, of course, this isn't where Kauai is, but it's the same way. The 9 isolates are identical to each other. They differ at just one minor mutation, but they have one unique allele, one marker that's unique to Kauai. And I don't know where it came from, but I'd bet anything it came from somewhere on the Big Island. And it was likely transported on wind. If you look at those particular trees, they all have some common wind exposure. Okay. So here's a instance here where we have genotypes that are common in Puna, and then they showed up in 3 big jumps, these 3 sites. Within each of these sites, there are unique mutations, but they all seem to be derived from this Puna population. So it jumped over whatever was dominant in Hilo, and it showed up here on the Hamakua coast. And all 3 of these sites showed up within 2 years. The mortality started within 2 years of Hurricane Iselle. And in Hurricane Iselle, which hit this area pretty hard, it must have scattered a lot of inoculum. Okay. There's some minor movement here. This is earlier sampled on DOFA land on Cattle Hunt Road. It's now moved up onto the DHHL lands and also at the Wapahoihoi Management Unit, which is maybe a couple miles further north, a few miles further north. And it's all one genotype that's moving. So that seems to be spreading from that one site further north. Not very far, but slightly. This Ho-Now-Now original outbreak included not only Ho-Now-Now, but this Holualoa area. The disease has since 2016 expanded out here in Holualoa, plus it's moved up north to Kolokamauka. But it's one genotype that seems to be moving up, but relatively slowly. This is a relatively recent outbreak here at Kolapa, and I think on Friday it's on the field trip, is it, Bill? So you'll see that. It's also in Waimea, in the Parker Center, in the shopping center, on planted ʻŌhiʻa trees. And another planting down the road, but on the main road there in Waimea. And it's one genotype. I'm not saying, I don't think it moved from Kolapa to Waimea, but they have a common source of inoculum. Somewhere there's that genotype that's kicking out inoculum that's hitting both places. And it's more or less simultaneous. The trees are going out about the same time. Okay, so to me, it's most disturbing that it's this green genotype that seemed to have gotten started, maybe in the old cane fields west of Hilo, that seems to be progressing up the Hamakua coast. And 3 years ago, this is what I had feared. I was surprised when it showed up so quick at Kamaʻeʻe and Waipunalei, but it appears that was a whole different incident. A different source of inoculum. But it's this movement up the Hamakua coast is troubling, and of course, movement up to Hawaii is not, or Maui is not very far away from here. So that's where I kind of thought we'd see it on a new island, that it'd move up from the Hamakua coast or Kohala up to Maui or some other place, but instead we got this mystery infection at Kauai. So if this is going back to our genetic map, where it is, we don't know where this came from, but it's so close to the main genotype here on Hawaii, I think it must have come here from the Big Island. And this one, this Puna type, I'm not sure it's going anywhere. We haven't seen it spread very much. And this is the one that seems to be the most dangerous right now, is this green genotype. So, but I'm hopeful that on Kauai, if it is restricted to one area, they're actively managing the sites here. And they do have Julio ʻŌhiʻa in many places, but I don't think it's near the threat of Luco ʻŌhiʻa. And I think they can, I'm hopeful they can contain it there. So I know the people there are working pretty hard on trying to see that it's contained, and I think it can be done. It's so early in the outbreak. Now, where do we focus management, and what can we do? And I guess that's what the rest of the meeting's all about. But I think we got this map here to work with, and the database is pretty flexible, so I can collect more isolates, or somebody else can collect isolates and easily add to these analyses. So it's designed that it could be done for years in the future. So.